Nine Inch Nails. Catman has always fucked with 9 Inch Nails, ever since he was a youth. Trent Reznor, he's a funny guy. He wasted like 10 years playing Quake if I remember correctly. Also, I'm sorry, what the fuck was my man thinking? What's this all about? Trent Reznor, he's also a very sad man, a very angry man. Here's a picture of him hugging Robert Smith. Look, he's had his pain affirmed by the Oracle of Anguish himself. He's the real deal. I remember when I was like a proper edgy 13-year-old, I knew this strange wretched wasteman kid who always tried to get me to listen to 9 Inch Nails. And usually I would beat the living shit out of him, but a couple years later, I listened to the Downward Spiral for the first time, and I was like, oh shit, man was right. Much time has passed, and I have now long been acquainted with 9 Inch Nails. But I think the Downward Spiral was always their best album for me. It just has such a well-defined concept to it. The album is a constant struggle against oneself, but not in a cool, breaking your shackles, ascension kind of way. It's more like you're constantly trying not to be dragged even further towards rock bottom and failing. The music on this album is mostly like really hectic and really loud. It's got these guitars that go ka-chung, ka-chung, ka-chung. It's got very layered electronics and synths that spread over everything. It's got like harsh sounds of industrial machinery sometimes making up the skeletons of songs. It's pretty dynamic too though. Because the album is largely so hectic, the more calm moments can really be quite special. And they always feel very meaningful within the narrative of the album. Also, so many of 9 Inch Nails' most memorable tracks are right here on this album. When I think of 9 Inch Nails, it's 9 times out of 10 gonna be some shit off this album. The band have got many classics under their belt, I'll give them that, but it is just the truth. This album rules. I don't want to waffle on too much in this intro, because my thoughts on the album will become very apparent as I go through each individual track and provide my thoughts on each one. So yeah, enough introduction, I want to just jump straight into Mr. Self-Destruct. Mr. Self-Destruct is a pretty on-the-nose song really, but it goes hard. Essentially, the song is about that part of you that seems to work against your best interests and drives you by impulse into self-destructive habits that give you quick rushes, quick highs, things like drugs, sex. It's that monster that causes you to become consumed by these lusts and desires. This monster is given the name Mr. Self-Destruct. The song very much means to distinguish this part of you from the good side of you who wants the best for yourself. Mr. Self-Destruct is practically portrayed as a demon who means to convince you, and you give further control over yourself to him. You internalize the feeling of loss of control and begin to feel that Mr. Self-Destruct is just you. That's just your nature, and you can't escape it. You can't change. The song starts out with these slamming sounds and the sounds of someone being hurt. Basically sounds like someone being beat up. And the slamming and groans increase and get faster and faster until the song explodes in. I take this beginning to depict Trent's self-destruction really. It's like he's literally beating himself up. When the track explodes in, it's a mixture of guitar and synths. Really, I lack the expertise to know what exactly I am hearing, but it's incredibly layered, constantly morphing and squirming too. The guitar is heavily electrified, if that makes sense. Of course, you got the drums pounding in the back too, maintaining a pretty simplistic rhythm that kind of feels like primal. There's an interlude in the middle of the song where everything gets very quiet, and it represents a moment of clarity really, where Trent understands that he is the only one that allows these self-destructive tendencies to consume him. This moment sounds very contemplative, with Trent whispering, "You let me do this to you," and straightforward bass plodding along, and this little calm melody and whirring light electronics gliding in the mix. However, even with this knowledge, Trent still cannot stop these impulses of his, and he plunges back into being controlled by them. And this is represented by all of the instrumentation coming back in. Only this time it's met with a massive wave of noise raising in volume until the track ends and just becomes scrambling guitar riffs. A great opener if you ask me. Again, it is quite on the nose, but I find it very impressive in terms of the music and production, and really it's a great introduction to the concept of this album, giving us knowledge of the kind of mechanisms that fuel Trent's downward spiral, and ultimately, this is something present within everyone. We all do things counterintuitive to our own benefit or health. We know we shouldn't do them, but it happens anyway. Even if you aren't in a bad place with it like Trent is on this album, we all still indulge in things that we shouldn't. We have conscious thought that is very discerning and sees everything for what it is. You can have full clarity of something like an addiction, for example, but that doesn't mean you won't then crave your fix and ultimately give in to your crutch as to satisfy your withdrawal pang and the mental craving. It can really be a very tricky dilemma, and it can require a multitude of things to escape from. Like, you'll have to remain cognizant of the true nature of what these impulses are. You'll need confidence and belief in yourself. You'll need a positive mentality generally, and ideally you would need support from others or the world around you. These are things Trent doesn't really have, and these aspects are explained throughout the album. The next track on the album is Piggy, which apparently has a dual meaning. One meaning being probably the more important one, which is its context in the narrative of the album, but the other one is to do with factors relating to the band at the time. But I think it does also add to the narrative of the album, because it presents Trent's mentality at the time of making it. You see, Piggy was the nickname of Richard Patrick, who was a guitarist in Nine Inch Nails from 1989 to 1993. He then went on to start the band Filter. Trent apparently wrote this song because he was pissed off that Richard wanted to focus on his own music. And you know, maybe there are more circumstances that we don't really know about. Maybe there were a lot of other tensions going on there. We can't really know. But the song really does feel mean-spirited and scathing. Like it's mocking his bandmate quite a lot. And it reeks of like a strong level of ego from Trent. That's why I think this little story complements the album in some way. At the time, Trent really was a fucker. In terms of the song's meaning in the narrative of the album, it's about being broken up with. And at a very inopportune time too, now that he's infested with these self-destructive habits. He has begun going down the downward spiral, and now a pillar of support in his life has been severed, leaving him alone. The repeated words, "nothing can stop me now, cause I don't care anymore," are quite effective. Now that he is devoid of a support, truly nothing can stop him from sliding further down the downward spiral. He just doesn't care anymore. There's no standard he has to meet because there's no person he has to impress. Generally, this apathy, this not caring what happens to himself, is a very dangerous thing. It destroys any kind of drive he may have had left to improve himself. It doesn't so much as trouble him now, really. He's just gonna accept that he will further send himself into a rut. In terms of the music, this song is much more, I guess, like calm compared to the opening song. Starting out with just bass and light drums and some light percussion and even the sound of someone clicking their fingers. This song feels really cool, to be honest, but it really is so negative at the same time. Everything is going wrong, but I can't lie, at the same time it does just have this really like smooth and suave feeling to it. In the chorus, the song is met with a very rigid guitar riff as Trent expresses his apathy, and later the track is met with this cool as hell organ and these strange whirring electronic sounds. Really, there are many moments on this album where you'll find something very subtle in the mix, just little details that make it clear the gang weren't messing around when they made this shit. Later, drums start slamming and it's kind of like foreboding in a sense. It's sort of like these slamming drums represent things getting worse, but Trent is totally stone-faced to it. He doesn't care anymore. The track ends with this little, I guess, keyboard melody, which I like a lot. I sort of feel within this melody the sadness of the state of things in this track, which haven't really been expressed because Trent can't feel it. He doesn't care anymore. But then this melody makes us as the listener feel how fucked up and tragic the situation is. And generally it forebodes of what is to come, I feel like. It tells us things will get worse. Next we have the song Heresy, an aptly named song. This is a song where Trent expresses his opinion on the idea that religion could save him from his downward spiral. His opinions on it aren't very agreeable. First of all, he tells us that religion is something that makes people blind. The total belief in one doctrine, it does kind of just make people retarded. Limiting yourself to only be able to think and interpret through one lens. It is just a silly thing to do, really, innit? Something I find pretty interesting about this song is that Trent wrote it in response to conservative Christians using the AIDS epidemic to promote their own agenda. So I guess that's why he made it so scathing and so blasphemous really. There's a couple lines that reference this AIDS thing, like, he tries to tell me what I put inside of me, which is basically Trent saying to Christians, I'm gonna take all the heroin and all the cocks in the arse that I want, because I'm not sheeple. Then there's this other line, he made a virus that would kill off all the swine. He's saying that he would never bow down to a god that would create such a virus as AIDS, or really that allows or even creates himself such constant suffering in the world. Really, Trent would view this god as the source of all problems and all misery. The chorus goes incredibly hard. God is dead and no one cares. If there is a hell, I'll see you there. This is both an expression of ultimate defiance against the conservative Christians that tried to impose themselves upon him, and also in the narrative of the album, it demonstrates that now Trent has no support from anything like the belief in a higher being to keep him on course. We see how the lifelines that hold Trent up are cut gradually during the start of this album. It's interesting because Trent sees the followers of Christianity to be mindless sheep who are imposing binds and suffering upon other people. And I generally do agree with him on that. But at the same time, he is suffering more than any of them. It is like he resigns himself to suffering and accepts it. There's like a pride thing going on where he sees himself as much better than these morons. And it's almost like he pushes himself further into self-destruction just to in some way defy them. On this downward spiral, his attitude and mentality has become very negative and spiteful by this point already. To the point he wants to be like a messed up junkie queer just because it goes against what Christians preach. He is riddled with resentment. Very interesting subtle things going on here, I think. Musically, this song is also awesome. It starts out with these really cool synths bleeping and blooping until they're joined by these pounding drums. It's almost like a dance track at points. When the God is Dead chorus comes in, guitars blare, and it's so awesome. This is followed by a cool defiant guitar riff too, which carries on through the next verse. Trent is really showing them what for. Again, so many subtle little things going on in this track, especially during the instrumental bridge near the end. And I love how crazy the guitars end up going during this portion of the song. This is a contender for my favourite song on the album, really. I always really liked it because it goes hard, but analysing it more deeply, I have recognised a lot of things about this song I find pretty interesting. Next we got the March of the Pigs, which follows up the last track with a similar theme. It's a song that's filled with a lot of distaste for human beings generally. Trent despises the mindless ways that people operate and wait for slop to be fed to them. Actually, slop memes. That's what this track is about, really. A heavy distaste for consumerist culture and a desire for there to come an end to it all. I have also been feeling this way recently. Much less of a distaste for consumerists themselves, but certainly a distaste for consumerism. So digging into this song was quite relatable for me. The song portrays consumerists as groveling around and debasing themselves, essentially acting like pigs or livestock. It's quite the disgusting mental image to behold. The song also has another aspect where it points out how many people simply conform to this way of life as they're afraid of not fitting in and are really suppressing their true feelings. And Trent is calling for people to cast away these lies and just be real. Trent is sick of a tired, fake world and wants people to at least acknowledge what is going on. The ending lines of the song, I think, are pretty good. They suggest to me that while yes, consumerism might in fact be the perfection of slavery, consuming is exactly what consumerists want to do. And so they are very content in being slaves. They can sleep soundly. They're practically in bliss. Trent is saying, no, you should be angry and hate everything like me. And he is kind of right. For this slavery to end, they need to acknowledge the uncomfortable truth. They have to accept uncomfortability and they have to disavow the comfort that keeps them complacent. Only they shouldn't join Trent on his downward spiral. He is free of the consumerist mentality, but he has nothing to latch onto. He's out of control, really. I think that's something that contributes to his hate being so visceral on this track and being aimed primarily at consumerists for being stupid and not at consumerism as a whole. He mocks them and is condescending and sarcastic all across the song. He is isn't a slave to the status quo, but with that he feels jaded and rejected, and he lashes out in spite towards conformists. Musically, this song is very fast-paced. I believe it is actually their fastest song. The pace of the drums would be fitting on a drum and bass track or something, although they are far from fitting the same aesthetic. There are very cool things going on with the synth work on this track that reminds me a lot of EBM and that sort of stuff. It's another song that feels quite dancey in a strange, twisted way. During the verses, everything is very aggressive. Trent is shouting, spiky guitars and synths are like a whirlwind, and paired with the ceaseless drums, it feels like an assault. During the choruses, it goes into primarily synthy parts, and then has these little piano bits that are really sarcastic, as Trent asks, "Doesn't it make you feel better?" in reference to people consuming his art thoughtlessly. Another very good track. Every track I've talked about so far I love really. Now we have Closer, which is a song I always found to be exceptionally deranged, exceptionally animalistic. Just all the aggression and lust that comes with a burning desire for orgasmic, propagative sex. It just feels like grit teeth, sweat, mind going a mile a minute, especially during the second chorus where those blooping synths come in and Trent starts shouting. I know all men understand this song, these feelings, but this really is like rock bottom lust, it feels like. The kind of feeling where you feel that you live only for sex. You're just a thing now. You lose your sense of self and identity. It doesn't matter who you are. All that matters is momentary pleasure. This song really is like being in a pit. And whenever he's having sex, it isn't about his partner at all. He could be fucking anyone. It doesn't matter. They're like a prop to him. He views them almost like a victim that he is imposing his own fucked up nature upon, his own selfish troubles and needs. Of course, he feels shit about this too. Really, there's such a lack of any intimacy, any love, any sort of positive connection that's supposed to come with sex. It's just deranged. He does all this intentionally to run away from the way that he's feeling inside. There is a battle across this album between the self that Trent perceives as real and Mr. Self-Destruct. And Trent gets battered in this battle constantly, literally crying out, "Help me," across this track. The verses speak of the ways in which Trent has become completely broken. He doesn't even really feel things anymore in the same way. He doesn't sense a soul within him or really even believe in one. Again, the lifelines that hold a person firm and strong have been cut, and Trent has nothing to stop him from practically transforming into a beast on this track. The line, "You get me closer to God," is quite twisted really. We already know that Trent does not believe in God, and that he is a very blasphemous man. What this line means really is the euphoria that he's experiencing from this perverse relationship that he has with sex. He equates his perversion and primal bestial nature to godlyhood. Outside of how detached he has become from a healthy relationship with things like sex and God, it demonstrates what is important to him. Orgasm is his God essentially. It's his reason for living. I'm glad there are songs out here that depict this kind of insane hedonism where one values orgasm above all else as a bad thing. I feel like there are too many psyops out there trying to get us to believe the opposite. In terms of the music, it does feel very raunchy, very perverse and sexual and hedonistic, with these sort of funky synths and constant ticking, aggravating sounds. When the music comes in more on the choruses, it really does get across how kind of deranged and unhealthy and obsessive this whole practice that Trent engages in is. This especially becomes the case later on where Trent's vocals get way more unhinged and he's being quite aggressive. Again, those blooping synths on the second chorus, really a great addition to the song. It's like a blaring siren going off in your head as chemicals are going haywire. A lot of confusion within the track as Trent tries to escape from himself. That's what a lot of the music evokes. The second half of the song, I suspect, is supposed to represent the euphoria he talks about, as the music becomes much more airy, kind of like you're gliding through the clouds or something. Yet the constant moving beat keeps going. Trent is still doing what we know he's doing, but mentally he's somewhere else. He's in bliss. Of course though, this doesn't last at all. This is only a momentary escape. He's back on the downward spiral. The melody at the end kind of reminds me of the melody at the end of Piggy, and it represents the same kind of feeling to me. He's sliding further down that downward spiral. The next song is Ruiner. The song appears to me to be about various forms of authority and how they serve to ruin Trent's life, whether it's God. Even though Trent doesn't believe in God, his influence acts as an authority in the world because people work off the word of God and society is structured around Christian values. Or if not God, then other authorities such as the government. Generally people in power. They are also imposed onto those beneath them as if they are gods. And they represent a system that keeps Trent and people like him oppressed. There's a sexual metaphor in the song that basically means that these authorities that Trent labels as ruiners are fucking his life. They're dominant forces that he has to submit to. People are led to believe that they have to rely on these authorities, and so they support and follow them. Trent could never live like that. It's like he considers it a form of rape to have such a domineering force define your life. But really, there is no escape from it. And he considers that the only authentic way of life is to live like a complete wreck, which just serves to feed further into his own self-destruction. Trent recognizes the way that these authorities spread their agenda to the populace to essentially create 1 million foot soldiers who will protect them, likely unknowingly. He once again wants all of these people to wake up to the ways that they're being manipulated. And you know, here's the thing. The whole thing is kind of like a metaphor for Trent's own self-destructive impulses. He is the ruiner, or Mr. Self-Destruct is. Mr. Self-Destruct is the authority over him. It dictates what he does, and Trent kind of realizes that what oppresses him is merely himself. Who is he to shift the blame onto authorities like God or the government who are so detached from what he witnesses on a day-to-day basis, when it's him who imposes the majority of his suffering onto himself? The overtness of his oppression is caused entirely by himself. He acknowledges this and essentially comes to stand for once against Mr. Self-Destruct. And in the outro, he insists to himself that because he sees what is happening to himself with clarity, there's no way he can falter or lose against the ruiner within himself from this point on. But you may remember a similar thing happening on Mr. Self-Destruct, and that didn't last. So this isn't a very convincing declaration to us. And as you will see, this certainly isn't the end of Trent's downward spiral. This song starts out with a kind of hip-hop edge in the beat, this strange twisted sample looping alongside it. And then you get some nice EBM sounding synths coming in. The instrumentation becomes overpowering while Trent is ranting about the ruiner. Really, it's quite difficult to make out the lyrics, but it's certainly not the only time where that is the case on this album. There are these kinds of sweeping, bright synths after these hectic parts which feel quite serious. After Trent comes to his self-reflective realization on this song, things get a lot quieter, like he has mental clarity, and a cool guitar solo comes in, later being met by drums. It feels like power, but there's still shit feeling wrong. Strange screeching sounds, he's still infested with disease, and when he insists to himself that nothing can hurt him and nothing can stop him, it is in this meek sort of whisper. It's like he has to repeat it 1,000,000 times to try to get it to be true or something. Trent said in an interview that this song was supposed to be 2 different songs originally, and I could see that being true. I do think the switch up between his thoughts on God and authority to recognizing the oppression he imposes upon himself is a little abrupt, and I guess maybe a little bit forced or rushed. It's still a great song though, so not much of a complaint. Next we have The Becoming. A pretty wild song if you ask me, with this constant sample of people screaming. The song is about Trent transforming from man into machine, essentially meaning that he's losing his ability to feel at all. The way I always imagine these screams in the back paired with the meaning of this song, it's kind of like he's wreaking havoc upon the people now that he has transformed into machine, and he does not feel anything while doing it. He does not feel empathy or sadness or feel that it's wrong. Nothing. He's just like eliminating them. Now that's not really what the song is about, but you can take it as a metaphor for this machine self eliminating the feeling human self. The screaming is the horror that the real Trent sees in this transformation, as the real him is slowly being wiped out. The whole song feels incredibly metallic and robotic, like so many harsh robot and machine sounds, all very janky and rigid. allows for very vivid imagery of this machine man. Trent describes how the earnest and real version of himself was torn apart and how he has been tucked away, not wanting to feel anymore due to overexposure to pain, preferring to be this totally numb being instead. In a way, he's very disturbed by this and practically considers it to be a death of himself. You could definitely say that drugs are a big part of this. They're taking over his circuitry and numbing him, and his sense of self is suppressed. But I think generally it's more than just that. It's the need to escape from pain that drives this to happen. It just at the same time horrifies Trent. The disharmonious janky melody that starts off this track and appears throughout is pretty cool and memorable to me. I feel like generally all of the instrumentation on this song feels wrong, but in a good way. The songs up to this point tend to have moments of tenderness, but everything about this song is just so harsh, and it feels kind of like a huge monster. Conveniently, we are able to imagine a huge robot due to the song topic, like moving through the city, pulverizing everything. And it really is like everything good about Trent is being pulverized with this song. The energy is monomaniacally and mindlessly trudging on. Always some next crazy bleep or bloop or scraping of metal or something being hit. The drums, for example, are very abrasive. They're like trash cans being crushed or something. Of course, the constant screaming sample makes it all feel way more insane than it already would sound. Later it goes into this acoustic part that feels kinda sarcastic and very just like mentally damaged and despondent to me, with these moaning vocals in the back. Of course it all gets overtaken by very noisy and practically grating electronics, and after that some of the most loud and badass riffs on the whole album. The track evokes a strong sense of danger really. Every aspect of it feels oppressive. Really not a fun song to listen to in my opinion. But that's not to say it isn't good. It's very good. It just makes your head hurt a bit, and in terms of the narrative of the album, it just makes you feel like shit. Next there's I Do Not Want This. In this song, Trent is struggling against himself. Almost so he is struggling against the machine. I do not want this. Don't you tell me how I feel. He's really fighting the narrative of the machine here. But at the same time, there are very negative sentiments of not caring about anything still present. There's a sort of flip-flopping between caring and not caring as Trent struggles to keep his humanity. The negative aspects of Trent try to sabotage him by mocking him and bringing him down, telling him he isn't worth shit and doesn't care and that he should just give in. I find the outro pretty interesting lyrically because it's essentially Trent coming to the realization that even if he wasn't totally fucked up, he still wouldn't be able to change the world in the ways that he wants. Trent acknowledged on Ruiner that it would be terrible for the world if he was powerful. We've seen multiple times on the album that his misanthropy makes him want to wipe away the pigs, as he calls them. But whatever attempt he could make to do that would ultimately be meaningless, as it would affect nothing in totality. Maybe he would just take a few people out. It means nothing. He doesn't have godlike powers. He can't be an ultimate authority that can do whatever it wishes with humanity. He's just a loser basically. And he won't ever be able to achieve this vision of his. He considers that it is impossible to do anything that matters. The music on this one is pretty despondent, beginning with these sort of insecure piano keys and drums. It all feels pretty off balance and used up. The choruses where Trent repeats, "Don't you tell me how I feel," they explode with very loud guitars compared to the volume of everything else on the song. And it really feels like a lot of struggling and defiance. He's making a stand in those moments, even if they are less reasoned out and more just telling these bad aspects of himself to fuck off. The last portion of the song is filled with very crunchy, rattling guitar riffs. They're quite disorienting, sort of like a downward spiral. Big Man with a Gun is pretty funny to me because in part Trent wrote it to make fun of rap music, but it does worm itself nicely into the narrative of the album. Basically, the idea is that after having the possibility of ever doing anything meaningful stripped away from him, there's nothing to really stop him from going out and taking out his hurt on others, making people suffer simply because he suffered. And it makes him feel better about himself to impose his misery upon others. He becomes just as tyrannical as the authorities he hated on and criticized for oppressing him earlier in the album. If not, he's become worse for imposing this suffering on a much more personal and direct level. In society, it's subtle. The suffering is spread out among everyone, but Trent imposes the brunt of all his troubles upon one person at a time. Another reason he is doing these things is because it returns to him the sense that he has power over his life, after the kind of ego death he had at the end of the last track. He wishes to feel strong and powerful because he failed to be strong and powerful when it mattered most for him, and he let himself be consumed by self-destruction. Now he has to see first-hand evidence of his power and influence in the atrocities that he commits. The ability to take someone's life away. Really, he's just deeply insecure, and his masculinity is kinda shattered. He keeps saying he's trying to prove that he's a man and stuff like that. He says, "Nothing can stop me now," which is a line that's repeated a few times throughout the album. I kinda take it to mean here though, that he's been completely taken over. There's no earnest Trent here, just a monster. It would appear he's raping too on this track. It would appear he's doing a rape. He says about making the victim suck it, and in the chorus talks about not only letting off bullets, but letting off loads. At this point, he is more deranged than anything leading up to this moment. The track sounds deranged too, with these whirring, strange, distorted samples, and this animalistic fast-pacedness to it all. Generally, the whole thing feels very aggressive and kind of riddled with desires. Really, at this point, those impulses that Trent has been fighting the whole album have consumed him so much that he is them. He's defined by them. There's a point where the drums start to sound like gunshots, which is very fitting. Next we have A Warm Place, which surprisingly is the most tender song on the album, and it really hits me in the feels. This is the only song on the album that's entirely instrumental. The song is very relaxed, but it's also very melancholic and sad and feels like mourning to me. I kinda take it as a lament for Trent's true self, a send-off after he's been entirely consumed on the last track. It makes sense as now that part of Trent is completely silent, no more fighting, no more struggling, it's died. At least in the sense that he can have any sort of influence over his being. There's this stretching, droning ambience, and then these absolutely heart-wrenching melodies. I reckon this is the underrated song of the album. Every classic album has the one underrated song, you get me? Great stuff. Not too much to say about it though, given it's all instrumental, but the melodies really are killer. And it really is so powerful to have such a heartfelt song on this album, surrounded by such anguish and derangement. Next we have Eraser, which starts off very strangely with these noises, kinda like someone is trying to blow into a trumpet, but they don't have breath strong enough to make any sound, and these whirring non-verbal vocals floating either side of the mix. Then drums start slamming down, and eventually synths join, but it does all still feel quite weird, and strange distorted vocal snippets only add to that feeling. Not to mention the totally disharmonious, creepy guitars that come in later. Things build up to this point where everything does feel very mentally damaged, and eventually Trent finally appears on the track. Now it's like human thought and introspection has completely disappeared, and the lyrics are just his impulses without veneer, just impulses being listed, the kind of impulses that fuel a track like Big Man with a Gun. Only now some new impulses, a desire for death, the first time that Trent is suicidal on the album. Perhaps recognizing now he's gone too far, it seems to him that he is beyond help, that he could never restore himself. He's become a set of mental processes now, barely operating on any sort of human level. The song feels so twisted, honestly, especially as Trent gets suicidal. The way he shouts "kill me" just sounds way too authentic. A lot of emotional distress in this song, a very uncomfortable experience. And so then we have Reptile, which starts out with quite ominous ambience and sounds of things clunking around in the background. Industrial style, you know. It's met with disharmonious, vaguely creepy, tiny synth sounds, and eventually all this is cut through by instrumentation that sounds like heavy industrial equipment being operated. And across the track there are sounds which sound a bit like distorted elephants trumpeting, which I thought was freaking epic. The first verse on this song is exceptionally grim, referencing Trent's lover, likely the same lover from Closer. He recognizes that his girl is a whore basically, opening her legs for even the insects. You can take those insects to mean disease too. He recognizes that she is a disloyal snake who has within her the seed of 1,000 other men. This is not only really gross, but in this moment, Trent is very cognizant of the fact that even his lover, someone who is supposed to see him as very important, actually sees little value in him, and likely doesn't love him at all. We however do know that it's mutual from closer. Trent doesn't treat her like a lover should be treated either. It goes beyond her really though. She doesn't matter much to him, as we've just said. What he's really recognizing is that the sex he partakes in is just a lie, and that it's just a temporary pleasure to take him away from his constant anguish. His voracious need for sex is a disease. That's what he comes to realize, and he doesn't blame anyone else. He knows that he is fucked up. He puts that on himself. He has such clarity in this moment of his need to overcome his loneliness by imposing his fucked up troubles onto other people and corrupting them with his diseased self. He considers the harm he does to other people to be a major thing that sends him on this downward spiral. It really speaks of a lack of any sort of standards or decency. At the end of the song, Trent is screaming to be released, but as you could guess, it ain't that easy, bro. And he remains on his downward spiral. The instrumentation on the bulk of this track is quite heavy, with deep rumbling bass and waves of metallic crunching guitars. On the choruses though, there is a great sense of clarity aligning with the lyrics I talked about earlier, where Trent has perfect clarity of his situation. The music after the first chorus, it maintains that clarity that comes with the chorus, but also has crunching guitars and bass again, only now with another cool guitar riff on top of it all. And I think this is a good example of a thing that happens a lot across the album, where there's some kind of clarity and recognition of something being evoked, but at the same time it all sounds so oppressed. Like the self-destructed impulses are just gonna crash down again, and Trent has already deemed it impossible to fight them. Endless downward spiral. Next we have the title track, The Downward Spiral, which starts off with a strange metallic sample being looped ceaselessly and then being joined by acoustic guitar, which is played very slowly, very gently, and very downtroddenly. It's joined by more strange samples, and the mental clutter generally increases until finally it all clears out and this great, really heartfelt guitar melody is played. And it's one of the most emotional moments on the album for me personally. Such tenderness so far deep into this spiral. Eventually it ends though, and Trent's screaming is muffled in the background as he talks about how easy it was to kill himself. How all he had to do was put the gun to his head and bang, it was done. The lyrics here are so messed up, so ridiculously nihilistic. Problems do have solutions, you know. This track is pure madness really. And if it wasn't obvious already, this track basically means that Trent has killed himself. And now we finally reach the last track on the album, Hurt. Incredible song. Everybody knows how incredible this song is. Well, this track is really an encapsulation of everything we've come to learn across the album. And it's Trent looking at all of that and saying, yep, that's me. That's how fucked up I am. The downward spiral ends with Trent talking about things going hazy. And that's exactly what this song is. You hear it throughout, the hazy audio. The lyrics on this song, if you ask me, are the final thoughts he has in his last moments before bleeding out and his mental processes stopping. He is ironically aware of the fact that he really does feel something. He feels the pain very strongly, and it gives him a sign that he really is still alive and that he really is still in there. The pain is real to the point where it's the only thing that he is experiencing in that moment. His life experiences flash before his eyes. He remembers how he would take drugs to kill away all of his pain, but the memories of who he is and what he has done are inescapable. They cannot be forgotten, and even though he runs away from them by using drugs, they still define his life anyway. And he kind of realizes how absurd he was to try to run away from these things instead of facing them and dealing with them. All too late, he realizes. He then addresses himself tenderly as my sweetest friend, which really hits considering he's been at war with himself the whole album. It's like in this moment he really has complete clarity and he's been restored as a person for his last moments alive. He asks himself, what have I become? Again, perfect clarity, but ultimately regret. I think these peaks of tenderness we get on A Warm Place, The Downward Spiral, and all over this track speak of how Trent was before the downward spiral, when things were good, a very heartfelt and stable and good person. That's really what you have to imagine when he says, what have I become? He's been totally destroyed across the span of this album. It's really very tragic. He reflects upon his loneliness. His mind stretches far and further and remembers the girl he loved. Really only a side note in this story by this point, but something very important to consider. She is the first main pillar of support of Trent's that is taken away from him. And in the moment, he says that he just doesn't care and becomes content with sinking. But obviously, he really does care about her. He wouldn't have plummeted so much if he didn't, and he wouldn't be reflecting on her now either. He wouldn't be thinking about how he damaged her and contaminated her life, as he would put it. He recognizes that the places his ego drove him to are all stupid. He may have considered himself like a king when he went through with hurting other people, but now in the ultimate moment of reflection, he sees that his crown is a crown of shit, and he sits on a liar's chair. He was only deceiving himself, deluded into not recognizing himself for what he was. He considers all of the broken aspects of himself that he understood so fully, yet he was unable to ever repair himself, despite having the knowledge to be able to. And he kind of realizes in this moment the truth that there really was nothing stopping him from getting himself out of this rut and lifting himself out of rock bottom. After all, the girl he loved has managed to move on and become someone else. Why is he here lying on the floor, bleeding out because he was never able to recover from that moment? He recognizes it is absurd. He is full of regret, and he says that if he could start life all over again, he would. Ultimately, there is still a desire in him to live life. He was just driven to this point. He had a bad run of things, and it was mostly his fault. And not just this, but he wants to be able to keep himself. He recognizes that he still could have been saved. He didn't need to shoot himself, and he wants to keep himself. He's bleeding out, thinking about how if he was given just one more chance, he would find a way to live with himself, to love himself, to drag himself up out of these pitfalls that he found himself in during his lifetime. As he says, I would find a way, there are these blaring guitars, loud as fuck compared to the rest of the track, like one of the biggest juxtapositions in music. And I take it to mean that he has died. He's died on that thought. The rest of the song is like rumbling, inhuman noise. There's a lack of any life in it, so it makes sense. Let's talk about the track generally now. And you know, Trent's performance on this song is just so amazing. It's so tender and emotional. He genuinely sounds so torn up and hurt in the choruses. And during the verses he is very quiet and meek, and it does kind of feel like he is immobilized, you know. The song has this very hazy intro to represent, like I said earlier, that haze that he mentioned in the last track. Eventually Trent's vocals come in alongside acoustic guitar that's very light and kind of sweet, kind of sad and also kind of innocent. Especially when it gets to the melody that leads into the chorus. That melody is quite reminiscent of the melody I loved on The Downward Spiral too. Hits you right in the feels. And then the choruses leading out of it are just so like cathartic. Light piano keys and slow slamming drums, while Trent starts singing louder, with such passion, such genuine convincing sadness and love. That's what really makes this song unique, I think. For the first time in this album, and for the last time in our protagonist's life, there is love, and it just hits different. Why all of this repression? Why all of this madness? He has love for the girl he used to be with here, but also shows love for himself. And it makes me wish he could have loved himself before he did something so drastic. Really, this song, and I guess album, is the ultimate anti-suicide campaign for me. And it's something that convinces me that everyone should love themselves. That's the ultimate message. Love yourself. During the second chorus, these guitars come in building up tension. And now really feeling like the final moments. These guitars lead up to those loud blaring guitars I talked about earlier. And when they hit, chills. Probably one of my favourite moments in music, full stop. But yeah, this song kind of just ruins me, I'll be honest. I feel like this album can really be a lot to take in emotionally, especially towards the end. Things just get so bad in the narrative of the album. It could just be because I was so locked in making this video, but it really does feel horrible. Exceedingly more so as the album goes on. I never remembered the Downward Spiral being quite so much of a fucked up and emotionally devastating experience, but I guess I never locked into it. I always enjoyed it a lot and got emotional at it, but maybe I tuned out from some of the more morbid moments. This time around I couldn't do that. I was too locked in for that to be possible. I mean, it really did take a lot out of me to engage with this album so intimately. I think part of me may have been defending myself from the full brunt of this album before. Well, aside from the feeling of this album, it is immensely impressive to me in all of the electro-industrial sort of monstrosities this album churns up. Again, I don't really have the expertise to understand how these tracks were made, but I can recognize an amazing atmosphere anywhere. And these songs can get so dense and clustered with all different electronics and samples and barrages of industrial sounds. Trent is just a great performer throughout the whole thing, always delivering the emotion and the passion and the anguish required to make all of this work. The album is very effectively like claustrophobic and dirty. At times it can make your skin crawl, especially on Hurt. Hurt really does feel like really dirty. Really, after sinking into this album, I feel like shit. Feel like I have been on a downward spiral myself. Don't worry though, faithful viewers of the Catman show, because Catman is not like Trent. He has been blessed with positive, influential grind mentality, and as such will recover very quickly. Even now I am feeling better. Yes, I am starting to feel very blessed now. Anyway, this album is amazing. Better than I ever remembered it, to be honest. I give it 9.5 cats out of a possible 10 cats. But yeah, that's about it for this review. Subscribe to the Catman Show. Leave a like. Leave a comment. Goodbye.